The first strange sound came at dusk, a long, trembling groan carried by the wind across the empty plains. The man stopped, scanning the grasslands until his eyes caught a shape beneath a withered acacia tree. A lioness lay stretched on her side, ribs rising sharply with every labored breath. Dust clung to her fur, and the ground beneath her was darkened with sweat and blood. He moved slowly, cautious but drawn by something deeper than curiosity. Each step crunched through brittle grass. The air was heavy with the scent of heat and fear. When she noticed him, her golden eyes flickered open, not with aggression, but with a quiet desperation. She was trapped between pain and instinct, between life and loss. He knelt several paces away, lowering himself to the earth to show peace. The lioness shuddered violently, her claws scraping at the soil. A low growl rose in her throat, fading into a whimper. The man could see it now. She was deep in labor, yet too weak to continue. The wilderness around them was utterly still. No birds, no wind, only her ragged breathing. He whispered softly, letting his tone carry calm instead of fear. "Easy, you're not alone now." For a time, nothing moved but the trembling of her sides. Then her tail twitched, her body tensed again, and she let out a sound that seemed to split the silence. The man's pulse quickened. He had seen hardship before, wounded animals, starvation, death, but never this, a lioness clinging to life while trying to bring new life into the world. He reached for his water canteen, wetting a piece of cloth. Without touching her directly, he dripped water near her mouth. She sniffed once, hesitated, and then drank weakly, her rough tongue brushing against the dirt. It was the smallest sign of trust, but it was enough. Minutes crawled by like hours. Her body rippled with another contraction, more forceful this time. A wet shape appeared, small, motionless, fragile. The man's heart stilled. But then it moved. The cub let out a faint, gasping cry. The lioness turned, nudged it with her nose, and began to clean it with slow, deliberate licks. Her breathing steadied slightly. The man exhaled in relief, watching the primal bond unfold, a mother meeting her child for the first time. But the struggle wasn't finished. Her body convulsed again, exhaustion dragging through every muscle. The man stayed close, speaking in a low murmur, offering presence more than aid. "You're doing fine, just a little longer." The second cub arrived moments later, weaker but alive. Then a third, smaller still, its cry barely a whisper. The lioness gathered them close, curling her tail protectively around their tiny bodies. Her chest rose and fell in slow waves, the fierce glint returning to her eyes. As the sun began to set, the land turned gold and crimson. The smell of earth and new life mingled in the cooling air. The man sat quietly, awestruck, his hands trembling slightly though he had done so little. Around them, the plains began to stir again, distant roars echoing faintly through the wind. The pride was near. Two lion shapes appeared on the ridge, their manes catching the last light. The man stood slowly, stepping backward with care. The lioness watched him, her gaze no longer guarded but calm, almost grateful. Between them hung a silent understanding, the boundary between their worlds held, yet something invisible had crossed it. He turned to leave as the first stars began to show, his shadow stretching long across the grass. Behind him, the lioness lifted her head toward the breeze, 3 cubs nestled against her warmth. The distant roars grew softer, almost protective. When he glanced back one last time, she was licking her cubs clean, their small forms glowing under the dying sun. The savannah exhaled, alive again, complete. He walked on into the dark, carrying with him the quiet miracle he had witnessed, not a triumph, not a rescue, but a shared moment of life between two worlds that rarely meet in peace. Night blanketed the savannah in layers of quiet and shadow. The air shimmered faintly with lingering heat, though the stars burned cold above. From somewhere beyond the acacia grove came a low, rolling roar, ancient, commanding, and close enough to make the ground hum beneath the man's feet. He froze, turning toward the sound. The pride was coming home. The lioness stirred first. Exhausted but alert, she raised her head and inhaled deeply, nostrils flaring. Her cubs whimpered softly against her belly, their tiny bodies trembling in the night air. She gave a short, deliberate growl, a mother's warning, urging them to stay still. The faint gleam of blood glistened on her flank, catching the moonlight like liquid silver. The man knelt low among the tall grass, heart steady but cautious. He had known the pride would return, drawn by the scent of birth, but now that they were near, instinct screamed at him to stay motionless. Every sound seemed sharper, the buzz of insects, the distant trill of a night bird, the faint pulse of his own breathing. 2 lionesses appeared first, moving like whispers through the grass, sleek, powerful, silent. Their eyes glowed amber in the darkness, fixed on the mother beneath the tree. A third shape followed, larger, heavier, crowned with a dark menere that caught the starlight like fire. The dominant male moved with slow precision, his head low, his breath steady and deep. The lionesses reached the mother first. One circled close, sniffing her fur, then lowered her head in a gesture of acceptance. A deep, resonant hum vibrated between them, the ancient sound of belonging. The mother's tail flicked once, relaxed now. The second lioness brushed her muzzle along the newborn cubs, nuzzling them gently as they squirmed and squeaked. But the male's attention never left the man. He paused, shoulders rippling under the moonlight, eyes hard and unblinking. The air thickened between them. The man stayed crouched, unmoving, his gaze low, showing no threat, just quiet understanding. For a long moment, the wild seemed to measure him. The lioness sensed the tension. With effort, she rose onto shaky legs and stepped between them, her body forming a silent barrier. Her ears flattened slightly, tail curling low. Her gaze locked on the man's, calm yet firm. "You helped me," that look said. "Now leave." He nodded once, as if answering a command he could feel but not hear. Slowly, he began to step backward, careful not to break the fragile peace. The grass whispered under his boots. The male let out a deep rumble, the sound vibrating like thunder over the earth. But the lioness turned, brushed her head against his chest, and the growl softened into silence. The message was clear, the balance had been restored. Around them, the pride began to settle. The lionesses lay down in a loose circle around the mother, forming a protective wall of golden fur. The cubs pressed close to her warmth, their tiny tails twitching. The mother lowered herself carefully, curling around her young, eyes half closed in weary peace. The man lingered on the edge of the clearing, watching. The moonlight silvered her fur, touched the cubs with light like breath. The air smelled of life, raw, wild, and eternal. Somewhere far away, a hyena whooped, but it did not approach. The pride's presence ruled the night. He took another step back, then another, until he stood among the shadows where the grass rose high. From there, he looked once more at the lioness. She lifted her head, meeting his gaze across the distance. Her eyes glimmered, calm, knowing, alive. For a heartbeat, it felt like the whole world was still. Then she turned her head back toward her cubs, licking one gently across its tiny spine. Her breathing slowed, and the night folded around her like a cloak. The man exhaled, letting the moment sink deep into memory. He turned away and began his long walk under the stars, the plains stretching wide and endless before him. Behind him, the pride lay undisturbed, guarding their miracle in the dark. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The wild had already remembered him. The first sound was not a roar but a faint, broken cry, a whimper carried on the still air. The man turned sharply toward it, his eyes catching the tawny figure of the lioness lying under the bent shade of an acacia. Dust shimmered around her as she struggled to breathe, sides heaving, her body trembling with effort. The silence of the savannah had shifted, something sacred was beginning. He crouched low, moving slowly, the dry grass brushing his knees. Each step was deliberate, respectful. The lioness's gaze found him, alert, wary, yet too weary to rise. Her eyes, once fierce, now held exhaustion and fear. Around her, vultures circled high, patient shadows waiting for failure. The man's heart clenched. He could not turn away. Kneeling several feet from her, he studied the rhythm of her breathing. The contractions came faster now, her muscles tightening beneath her dusty fur. A deep groan escaped her chest. She clawed weakly at the ground, instinct battling exhaustion. The air grew heavy, the scent of blood faint but unmistakable. He whispered softly, "You're not alone, you can do this." It wasn't meant to calm her, more a prayer to the wilderness itself. The lioness's ears twitched, acknowledging the sound without fear. Minutes passed, stretched by tension and quiet courage. Each breath seemed to balance between life and loss. Then, movement. The first cub began to emerge, small, slick, fragile. The lioness's body shook with the final push, and the man pressed his hand into the soil, steadying himself against the raw power before him. A cry, thin but alive, pierced the air. The lioness collapsed briefly, panting, before lifting her head to lick her newborn clean. The man watched in silence, eyes damp with awe. Another contraction seized her, and a second cub came forth, then a third. Each one breathed, wriggled, and nestled into the warmth of their mother's belly. The lioness gathered them close, her rough tongue sweeping across their tiny forms, her tail curling protectively. The wind carried the scent of new life, soft and wild. Hours faded into amber light. The man remained still, careful not to intrude. He could feel the pulse of nature beating through the ground, the eternal rhythm of survival and renewal. The lioness, now calmer, turned her head slightly toward him. There was no threat in her eyes now, only a quiet understanding. One last cub came late, smaller, weaker. It struggled to breathe, its tiny chest fluttering against the earth. The man hesitated. Instinct screamed to stay back, but compassion drew him forward. Slowly, he reached out, using his scarf to clear the small creature's mouth and nose. The lioness tensed, a low rumble vibrating in her throat, but she didn't strike. She simply watched, eyes fixed, trusting him for that one suspended heartbeat in time. The cub coughed, then whimpered. The sound was enough. The lioness rose slightly, nudged it close, and resumed her gentle care. The man exhaled, his hands trembling. He stepped back, lowering his head in respect. Above them, clouds drifted across the fading sky, painted gold and rose by the sinking sun. A breeze whispered through the grass, carrying away the last traces of fear. Soon the lioness gathered her strength and stood, cubs pressed against her side. She turned toward the distant plains, where her pride would surely be waiting. Before disappearing into the tall grass, she looked back once. Their eyes met, a single moment that bridged the ancient divide between man and beast. He smiled faintly, whispering, "Go home." Then she was gone, her silhouette melting into the wilderness, her cubs following in fragile, uncertain steps. The world around him felt larger, softer, as if something eternal had just begun again. He knew he would remember this day not as a rescue, but as a witness to nature's quiet miracle. The savannah fell silent once more, bathed in golden light, alive with new beginnings. Morning light crept slowly over the savannah, turning the grass into waves of gold. The lioness moved carefully, her body still weak from the night before, her 4 cubs stumbling close to her heels. Each small step was uncertain, yet filled with the quiet strength of survival. From a distance, the man watched. He had not left her side all night, though now he stayed hidden, letting her reclaim her world. The air was cool, filled with the scent of dew and dust. All around, life was waking, zebras grazing, birds rising in spirals above the plain, but the lioness's journey held its own fragile rhythm. A sound broke the calm, faint, cruel laughter drifting from the far ridge. Hyenas. The man stiffened, his breath caught in his chest. The lioness stopped too, her ears twitching toward the noise. She turned, placing herself between her cubs and the unseen threat. Her muscles tensed, her tail flicked once in warning. The hyenas appeared, 2 dark shapes slinking through the tall grass. The lioness crouched low, her breath heavy but steady. The cubs pressed close, their tiny bodies trembling. One hyena crept closer, bold and curious, while the other circled wide. The man wanted to shout, to scare them off, but he stayed still. This was her fight, not his. A deep growl rolled from the lioness's chest. Then she moved, sudden, fierce, unstoppable. Dust erupted as she lunged forward, striking with claws and teeth. The hyenas scattered, yelping, tails between their legs. The savannah went still again. The lioness stood tall, sides heaving, her eyes burning with exhausted triumph. She turned to her cubs, licking one gently, nudging another upright. The man felt a rush of relief and awe. This was nature, harsh yet sacred, where strength came not from dominance but devotion. Hours later, under the growing heat, the lioness led her cubs onward. Ahead, a line of rocky outcrops shimmered through the haze, the pride's territory. The cubs followed, tripping and tumbling, guided by her soft, rumbling purr. At the ridge, movement stirred. The rest of the pride emerged, 3 lionesses and a young male, their golden coats gleaming in the sun. The returning mother paused, her cubs hiding beneath her legs. For a tense moment, the air held still. Then one of the lionesses approached, sniffed the newcomers, and brushed her head against the mother's neck in quiet acceptance. The cubs were welcomed, surrounded by gentle nuzzles and deep, vibrating purrs. The pride had grown again. From afar, the man smiled faintly. The story he had stepped into was now complete. The lioness belonged to the wild once more, stronger, whole, and surrounded by her kin. He turned away, walking into the wind. Behind him, the pride lay in the grass, bathed in light. The smallest cub lifted its head for a moment, watching him go, then nestled back against its mother. The savannah fell silent again, calm and endless, the sound of life continuing. The savannah was quiet that morning, too quiet. The wind moved lazily across the plains, stirring faint ripples through the grass. The man stood near the acacia grove where it had all begun. The air carried a dry sweetness, a mixture of dust, heat, and memory. For the first time in days, there were no signs of the lioness or her cubs. He knew she had returned to her pride, that her world no longer needed him. Yet still, he found himself waiting, eyes scanning the distant horizon where light and earth blurred into gold. A few vultures circled lazily in the sky. A herd of antelope grazed at the edge of a dry riverbed, their movements slow and unbothered. Life had returned to its rhythm, as if nothing extraordinary had ever happened here. Only the man's heart held the echo of that night, the shallow breaths, the soft cries of the newborns, and the trust that had passed wordlessly between man and beast. He crouched near the spot where she had lain. The ground still bore faint impressions of her struggle, now hardened by the sun. A few tufts of fur clung to the thorn bush beside him, small, fragile remnants of something vast and eternal. He whispered softly, "You made it." The words drifted away, swallowed by the open air. Somewhere far off, a lion's roar rolled across the plain, deep, distant, and proud. It might have been her, or one of the pride. Either way, it was enough. The man smiled faintly, his eyes glistening with quiet relief. He packed his few belongings, a canteen, a torn scarf, a camera he never used. The savannah didn't need proof, he thought. Some miracles weren't meant to be photographed, they were meant to be carried. As he began the long walk back toward the dirt road, the day grew warmer. The sun climbed high, shimmering against the landscape. Every step stirred the dry soil, releasing the scent of wild sage and distant rain. His boots left tracks that the wind quickly erased, as if nature itself refused to remember where he'd been. Halfway up the ridge, he paused. From that height, he could see far across the plains, a golden sea stretching beyond imagination. And there, near the farthest edge of the grasslands, movement caught his eye. The lioness, a faint golden shape flanked by 4 smaller ones, disappearing into the light. He stood still, breath caught in his throat. She did not look back this time. She didn't need to. Their story had already found its ending. The man raised a hand in a silent farewell, though he knew she could not see it. The wind shifted, brushing past him like a parting gesture. Then, slowly, he turned away. Behind him, the horizon shimmered under the noon sun, alive with quiet motion. Ahead lay nothing but miles of road and memory. He walked on, steady and unhurried, each step carrying him farther from the wild, but never from what he had witnessed there. And as the day faded into gold, the savannah remained, eternal, untamed, and forever whispering the story of a man, a lioness, and the fragile miracle of life.